And after the remeshing video, we are now going to texture our asset in InstaMAT. And as you can see, this is our final result here. And I'm going to show you some nice things like how you can use your vertex color map as a mesh ID mask, so we can texture different parts of the mesh separately, like the mortar here, the rocks and the top stone. And also some other nice things like how you could hide UV seams if you have some. And yeah, let's just start. Alright, so in this part we're going to texture our stone wall in InstaMAT. And as you can see, I already imported the mesh and also the map. So when we go to the package management, you can see we have our AO, curvature, mat ID, normal, vertex color. And when we go back to the layering project editor, we can assign those. So for the AO, we choose our AO. For the curvature, we choose our curvature. We won't need that mesh ID actually, because we're going to assign the vertex color map for our mesh ID. And then let's assign the normal tangent. And as you can see, we preserved all of the nice details we sculpted in ZBrush. So that looks quite nice. And we still have our low poly mesh, which is not that low poly, but I think it's enough. We could further optimize it down, but I stay with that. Looks quite good for me. And yeah, what we first have to do, or let's actually organize it a bit. So I create 3 folders, not like that, because it's a subfolder. One more and the third. So the first one is for the rocks. The second will be for the grout, and the top one will be for the top rock. And as we're gonna work with ID mask, it's quite good to have all those be separated. So maybe let's first just assign a color for this one. Let's go with a maybe light brownish color. At first, let's turn our roughness to 100%. Let's actually move this to the rocks folder. And we could now go in and use the mesh ID to mask. And I think those rocks were green. We could mask that out, but for the bottom layer we don't really need that, so we're going to delete that. Because when we go here and create a multi-channel layer and put it into the grout folder, let's make it a bit brighter than the rocks. So now when we use the mesh ID to mask on this one, as the layer is on top of the rocks and we mask those out, it's enough to have just the mesh ID to mask on this one. And same with this top rock. So when I create an additional multi-channel layer, and let's also choose a maybe a bit darker brownish color. Let's go more with a more gray one. Let's also bump the roughness to 100%, where we now assign the mesh ID to mask. I think this was blue. Okay, that's weird. Like that. As you can see, we now basically masked up everything nicely. So we have all of those elements separated, like the rocks, the mortar, and the top rock here. And yeah, now we can basically start to add some details. So at first, what I like to do as first step, I think I showed it in the rock layering video already. Let's quickly save that. Let's also give it a name. So let's call that stone column. I won't enter a description for now. Anyway, now let's save that. Let's go to the package management and let's actually save this as project copy. So we now have a duplicate. And then let's create an element graph. Let's drag in our copy here. So this is our normal map with all the details. We're gonna use an normal. Nope, it's height. Normal to height approximation. Then we actually have a curvature here. But when we use the normal map and choose a normal to curvature node, we have a few settings that we can make it a bit not nicer necessarily, but like we want it. So I want to make it sharper in this case. Like this maybe. Then let's use our AO. Let's blend it over. Like that. See how that looks like. Let's sharpen that up. More maybe. We can blend it over as well. Like that. What I also like to use is the height slope extract node. And what we are doing now, it will basically be the first color pass. I like to do it like that because, yeah, again, I'm more used to work with the element graph. But it's also quite a nice way to detail rocks or actually create the base color for rocks when you do it, or when you create some rocks or rocky material, and the results are always quite nice. So let's set it up a bit. I'm basically just eyeballing this. What does the flip look like? So maybe let's use both of those. One flipped, one not. Let's blend them with the maximum blend mode. And maybe let's sharpen this up as well. Not too much though. Like that. Let's do a blend. Yeah, that looks promising. Now I'll use the gradient map dynamic. And I have a reference here for the rocks, so I would like to have such a color scheme, basically. So we're gonna pick some colors from this image here. So let's set the gradient map dynamic to color. And I have to do it on the second screen. Or actually, maybe let's do it like that. So I like this part here. Let's do a second one. This part. One more. And it's still quite blurry, so we're gonna fix this soon. Maybe let's do this. And that should be enough. So when we go and sharpen this up, this will look better as well. Kind of misses a bit of detail. So let's use a dense noise. See how that looks. Let's use it like that. Then we actually gonna need an additional gradient map node, but not the dynamic version, but this one. Set it to color as well. Let's make that green. Let's check how that looks. Maybe like this. Then we're gonna vector warp this dense noise here. Just slightly. Then we blend it over here. So just to get a bit of extra detail. See how our maps now look. Now they are too grainy. Let's get rid of the sharpen node. Yeah, that looks good, I think. Let's just delete that. Now this should be basically the background color or the main color. And I blend it over with this to change the hue a bit. And I like those details here. And those as well. So let's see if we can use an auto levels on this one. Actually, we could use it maybe like that. Let's see. Does it look better? Nope, I like that more. Let's use a histogram edit. So I just want to mask it up a bit. That. And let's do something similar with this one. Let's see. So just slightly. And let's break this up with the clouds noise. So we're going to do a subtract. Unfortunately, I lost a bit of the recording and I did some adjustments here. So I changed the gradient maps a bit. And this one generates the color on just the normal map. The curvature map. And in this case, we are inverting that using a histogram edit node. Then blending this one with both of those. Then we are using that one, blending it over with the histogram edit on that one. Or actually, I used the histogram select here. And breaking it up with the clouds noise a bit. It's quite fine. And this is the end result, basically. So now we're going to define this as base color. Let's save that. Let's go back to our initial stone column project. Then let's use this multi-channel layer actually. Then let's change the base color to image. And let's then drag and drop this unnamed element here. Actually, we didn't need to change that to color. Let's set the projection mode to UV. And yeah, that already looks quite nice. But this was for the base. But maybe let's go quickly back to the unnamed project here and make a slight adjustment. I use my dB dust node here. Could also use the material effect dust. And we need the AO for this one. So here's our mesh AO. We need the normal. And we won't need a mask. So I just want to bring a bit of this grainy dust into the material or into the color image. That's still a prototype node, so let's see how that looks. So let's blend this, use that as a mask, and let's look for a nice color, maybe something grayish, but not on the blue side. It's not fine enough. It's just a slight detail. So coming back. Yep, that looks quite nice. I like it. Okay, so in the next step, let's create a few grunge layers. So let's use a multi-channel layer. And let's stay with this brownish color scheme for now. Let's maybe make it a bit darker. And bit more shiny, so we don't want to have the same roughness values all over the stones. Then use a mesh projected mask. Let's choose a different image. And again, I'm gonna use some of my custom grunges, but you can use everything from the library, which I will also do, but for the first pass I'll do this one. Let's see. Let's adjust the balance and the contrast. Actually, let's make it visible first by pressing S to solo the layer. Let's maybe invert that. Actually, it looked quite good, I think. Let's try a bit darker color here. Not too dark, but we want to have some variation. That looks good. Let's make an additional layer. Maybe let's try some more grayish color. Sorry, and a bit shinier. Let's use a mesh projected mask again. And let's choose maybe this one. Nope, that's too directional. Let's actually use, when we go to grunge and use one from the library, let's use, it's called smudges, which looks quite nice. So we solo it again. Let's get rid of the big wipes. Let's go to the adjustments. Like this maybe. And initially I wanted to add some height details as well, or normal details to the rocks here, but I think they look quite nice. We could do this so maybe we make some pores. So let's use a multi-channel layer again. So let's only use height. Let's keep normal on as well. So let's go to mesh projected mask again. And let's use some grain, maybe this grain noise here. Let's go back to this layer and bump up the height. Let's set that to subtract. Or actually the height here to subtract. So we have some additional details. I think we can set this to default. And then let's break this up with a mesh projected mask again. And let's use maybe clouds heavy. Let's solo this and let's adjust the scale. Let's maybe even override that. Let's go to adjustments. It's a bit too much of them, maybe. Yeah, but I think this looks nice. Let's maybe add an additional grunge layer, something really dark. So we create one under the one with the height details. And let's use a darker color. It's a bit too saturated. Maybe like that. And let's use a mesh projected mask again. And let's see, we could maybe use spot 7. Let's adjust the scale. And to have some bigger details actually. Let's go to adjustments again. That's a bit too shiny and a bit too much, so we need to break this up again. Let's use a mesh projected mask again. So I think the mesh projected mask is the one I'm using the most often. Let's choose a grunge again. Maybe this. I don't want to have too much of this darker details, but at least a bit. Maybe like that. And now let's maybe detail the grout a bit. So our grout here is pretty smooth, so Let's maybe even copy this height layer here. I think it was this one, right? Let's duplicate that, get it underground. Let's get rid of this mask. Let's get rid of both of them. Nope, the first one was needed. Here are our details. This one is not really necessary. How does that look? I think this is the wrong one actually. Here's the grain noise. Let's get rid of this one. And we need this mask, so let's duplicate that. Get it here. And we also want to set it to add. I think for first layer this is okay. Let's subtract it. And let's create an additional one. So we can just duplicate that and set this to add. And let's choose fractal sum, fractal should be under noise. Here it is. Let's set it up. Let's bump up the interpolate value, the gamma, and enable custom gain. Then we need to bump up the scale, even override it. Still a bit big. That starts to look good. See how it looks when we set it to subtract as well. Oh, I like to add more. I think this looks quite nice. Maybe we could break this up as well. So with a mesh projected mask. And let's use clouds. Smooth. So this is often quite a bit of a guessing game. And trial and error. Yeah, but this looks quite nice now. And for this one, there's a nice material in the library. I don't know how it's called. I think it's this coarse concrete here. So let's put it here. Yeah, that's this one. And we need a mesh ID to mask. And this is quite perfect for mortar or grout. Just need to adjust the color a bit. So let's go to the material settings here. And let's move it more to the red hue area. It's maybe too dark. This looks quite nice, and we have those nice grainy details here. Yeah, I think it's getting there. Looks quite nice already. I think for the grout, let's leave it as is. So now let's take a look at the top rock here. And let's see how it looks when we disable this layer. Actually looks quite nice already. But there's a material in the library that is quite fitting. I think it's rocky concrete. So let's just drop and drag it on the mesh, or drag and drop it on the mesh. Let's put it into the top rock folder. Let's use a mesh ID to mask. Like that. Probably need to make some adjustments. Those twigs here actually look quite nice. But I don't think I want to have them part of the material, or of the rock. So let's go to the material settings. Let's decrease the Twix density to 0. I think the rest looks quite nice already and is quite fitting. Maybe let's see what the base scale adjustment does. Yeah, maybe like that. And when we decrease the opacity, maybe we can blend it nicely with the bottom here. Which also looks quite nice. And I think we can get rid of this one. So like this, we would have the normal information from that layer, which also looks quite nice. I want to have it slightly in. Maybe like that. I want to have too much difference from the rocks on the top rock here, but I want to have at least a bit of a difference. Yeah, it looks quite good already, I think. And I think it's quite fitting as well. And now as we have set up all of the elements here, I think we can go in and make a few adjustments and improvements. So for example, for this one, I would like to have some of the rocks in a different color scheme, or not necessarily a color scheme, but I want to have a bit of hue and saturation variance on them. And when we look at the reference here, I think the colors already match quite nicely. So let's close that. And let's close those folders for now. So this were the additional height info. Let's create a multi-channel layer. And this one we need to mask. As you can see, it also covers the top rock here, so we don't want that. So let's use the mesh ID to mask. And I think the rocks were green, right? Yes. So now let's use actually some grayscale values. Let's make it like that maybe. And what I want to do now, I want to use mesh mask painting. Now this will be quite a lot of work actually. I want to paint some of the rocks in this gray color here. Not all, but some of them. So I speed this up because, as you can see, this will take quite a while. If we are overlapping, that's not really bad. Just gives a bit of more variance here. Okay, so now that this is done, let's set this to multiply. Let's adjust the color a bit. Maybe go in and change the roughness influence to 0. Just a bit, it doesn't have to be too much. Maybe let's change the color to something brownish as well. And then we could just repeat that. So let's create a new multi-channel layer. And let's use a mesh ID to mask again. Let's use green color. And then we go in and choose mesh mask painting again. And let's also disable the roughness and choose a brighter color. And let's now paint. We can even paint some of those that we painted darker. so we get even more variance. Let's make both of those. And again, it's the same process as before, so I speed this up. Okay, that seems to be enough. Let's use a multiply on this as well. Maybe let's try with overlay. Probably we need a different color. It's a bit too saturated. Let's set this to overlay as well. Yeah, this looks nice. Let's decrease the influence here a bit. So this part here is a bit messed up before because the UV seam is here and I set this to UV projection and not to planar. We're gonna fix this soon. Or actually, let's just fix it. So I think it's this layer. Let's duplicate that. Let's use a mesh mask painting. Can probably offset this a bit. Like that. And let's invert the mask. So let's paint our mask. Let's use some grunge map for the brush. Or maybe even just a noise. Let's use clouds. Clouds heavy. Let's set the vignette a bit. And the balance. Actually, the balance looks quite okay. And can now just paint over here and get rid of our seam. So that's a quite cheap but nice trick, I'd say. And it's gone. Let's maybe change the IBL. Set this to 1. Okay, so let's now add a dust layer. So let's create a new multi-channel layer. Let's change the color to something bright, but something that's also fitting to our color of the rocks. Maybe something like that. Let's increase the roughness. So we have 100% rough dust. Then let's use a mesh projected mask. Let's change that to UV. And let's look for our AO. Now let's set this layer to subtract. Let's preview that. And maybe let's make some adjustments. Let's increase the contrast. And for the dust, I want to have them only in these crevices here. So let's increase the brightness as well. Let's maybe play a bit with the balance. That could look nice. So as you can see, we already have something like a dust layer, but we want to have finer grain. And to achieve that, let's add a new mesh projected mask. And let's look for white noise. Let's preview that. Let's also go to adjustments and increase the balance to 1. The contrast as well. So as you can see, this is really grainy. Let's go to this layer and also increase the height. So we add some extra detail. Let's go back to our white noise. And let's maybe also adjust the scale a bit. Maybe like that. And there we have a bit of difference. So this looks quite nice already. But let's break it up a bit. So we're gonna add a new mesh projected mask. And let's just use a clouds heavy noise. See how that looks. Let's go to adjustments as well. Adjust the balance a bit and decrease the contrast. So this helps to bring the elements a bit more together so that it looks more natural. It's just a slight change, but it's still there. Maybe like that. And that's that for the dust. So the next step, I want to have a bit of dirt in this bottom layer or in this bottom part of the mesh or of our column. So let's add a new multi-channel layer. Let's keep the color as is for now, and let's use the mesh gradient mask, which is this one. Let's invert that. Let's maybe increase the contrast a bit. Let's change the color to something dark. Let's actually make it rough. Maybe like that. Let's make the color a bit brighter. Maybe something like that. And then let's break it up with some painting. So let's add a mesh mask painting. Let's set this to subtract. Let's go down to brush and let's use the grunge. Maybe this smudges grunge here. Let's increase our brush size. Maybe like that. Let's go to the brush settings. And I won't really paint like that, but I'll increase the size again and I just click a few times. Maybe we can get rid of this top part here. Maybe like that. Let's maybe decrease the blend opacity a bit. Like that. And now I also want to add a bit moss or some green for some plants. So let's add an element layer and let's look for moss. And I want to change the color a bit, so I don't want to have this more greenish color, but a bit brownish moss. Maybe a bit more saturated. That looks quite good. And let's add a mesh mask builder. Let's enable AO and let's invert it. Actually, it's already inverted. Let's adjust that a bit. Maybe let's add some contrast. That looks interesting already, so we don't want to have it everywhere, but just in some parts. So that's quite nice. Maybe let's see. We can change that a bit. That's nice. Now let's also enable curvature and set it to 1. But again, we want to adjust this a bit. We set the brightness, something like that. Contrast as well. Let's blur it a bit. And we could go back to the moss and change the color a bit. Let's see how it looks with more green moss. Looks nice as well, but I want to stay a bit more within the palette. I leave it like that. And then let's go in and go to our mesh mask builder and break it up a bit with the grunge. Let's use maybe spot 7. Let's decrease the opacity a bit. That's the curvature actually. Maybe to something like that. Let's maybe play a bit with the balance and contrast as well. Don't want to have too much of that. Let's maybe go back to this dirt layer. Let's go back to the mesh mask builder. Let's maybe adjust the color again. That's nice, and now I want to add a bit of AO. So let's create a new multi-channel layer again. Let's go to the color and change it to black. Not full black. Let's increase the roughness. Let's set that to soft light. Let's use a mesh projected mask again. And look for RAO. Set the projection mode to UV. Let's set this mesh projected mask to subtract. Let's go to adjustments. Maybe something like that. Let's maybe increase your brightness a bit. And let's change the layer opacity to something rather low. Just want to have that slightly in. That looks quite nice already. And I also want to pronounce a bit the edges a bit more in some parts. So what I like to do is to add a curvature to that. Let's use a new multi-channel layer. Let's increase the roughness again. And let's make it a bit grayish. Maybe like that. Let's use a mesh projected mask again. And let's look for our curvature map. Set the projection mode to UV. Let's go to adjustments. Set the balance to 1. Set the contrast a bit higher. And decrease the brightness. That's a bit too strong for my taste. It actually softened this up a bit, but it looks quite nice. Let's decrease the blend opacity. Let's go in and break it up a bit. So mesh projected mask again. Let's use spot 7 for that as well. Let's increase the scale a bit. Let's go to adjustments as well. Just a slight change. So exactly what I wanted. I think the top layer here looks quite nice already. Let's maybe go in and see if we can decrease the rocky concrete a bit. So we have a bit more of that grunge here. Let's go maybe back to the moss layer. Maybe like a bit moss on the top. Maybe we could go in and add it to the top rock as well, so we won't destroy this. So let's add an element layer again and look for the moss. Oh, I just duplicate that because I don't want to dial in the color again. Let's delete that mask. Then we need this ID mask, so let's just duplicate it and move it to this layer. And let's also use the mesh mask builder. Maybe we can just duplicate this as well. Just deleted it, but this might have been unnecessary. And let's go to the crunch here. Let's check the AO and the curvature as well. Yeah, I think that's finished now, so it looks quite nice. And I think I leave it as is. Okay, so this was the InstaMAT part on this medieval stone wall, and there will be one next video, a short one, where I show you how you can use this project and texture the other part of the wall. But for this one, that's that, and thanks for watching and see you next time.